There, you may have been asking how Ivanka and Jared specifically, because it's known that he's never around the White House on a Friday. He was traveling on the Friday, obviously, to be there, giving his father-in-law some backup. They got a rabbinical dispensation so that they could make that journey on this particular day. Let's talk to our Washington editor, James Bays, who's tracking all the twists and turns for us on this trip around the Middle East, from Saudi Arabia to Israel to the Vatican and then to the G7 in Sicily. James, welcome to the programme. Good to talk to you. I guess we might hear the same kind of tone that we got yesterday. Not the robust, on the defensive Donald Trump, not the free-range Donald Trump, but the conciliatory, the talk-to-each-other guys Donald Trump that we saw yesterday in that speech in Riyadh.
Yes, and I think the important person in all of this, you were just mentioning him, is Jared Kushner, because it's very, very, very clear that the architect of the whole Middle East leg of this trip, the one who did the arms deal with the Saudis, the one who has prepared the ground for this trip, is Jared Kushner. He has been speaking to the Israelis, he's been speaking to the Palestinians, two close lieutenants of him with slightly different roles, Jason Greenblatt, who is the envoy who's been shuttling between the two sides, and David Friedman, who's the new ambassador to Israel, who I think is trying to keep the Israelis happy, because they've certainly had some wobbles in recent days about some of the things that have been going on. They don't not like some of the arrangements for this trip. They've been a bit unhappy about that, and we can go into some detail a little later. But they're also, I think, a little unnerved by the very warm and cordial relations between President Trump and the Saudis, and in fact the rest of the Arab and Islamic nations that were gathered there in Riyadh. That very, very ceremonial welcome in Riyadh, we're told, prompted the Israelis quickly to come up with something that matched that, to call more cabinet ministers to the airport and give a bit of a bigger welcome to President Trump as he arrives here at Ben Gurion Airport. I've just come from Ben Gurion Airport actually a short time ago. The press charter, we travel separately from Air Force One, try and keep up with them, but we refueled in Cyprus. They, and this is interesting, fly and are allowed to fly, no one else is allowed to fly directly from Saudi Arabia to Israel.
Of course, there are no commercial flights from Saudi Arabia to Israel. We're looking at I guess there'll be the headlining shots in the next couple of hours or so, James. The band is playing, the Israeli flag flying high, the US flag as well. Donald and Mrs. Trump flanked by the Netanyahus on the red carpet as they take the salute. And the American national anthem is playing as well. Let's just get a sense of the atmosphere there on the ground in Tel Aviv. James, diplomatic thin ice. We're talking about diplomatic leverage. If we can just flip that on its backside for a second. I mean, what are the areas that the Trump administration feels it can go towards without risking detonating what looks like an embryonic process again?
Yes, well, I think what you'll probably see, and I think President Trump will be confident in doing, is not going into too many details at all. He won't be able to play this game for much longer, but I've spoken to a number of foreign policy experts and regional experts who say they really don't think there is going to be a plan announced, that he's not going to go into concrete details. He's going here simply to invest Donald Trump in this process, but I don't think we're going to get details of the process. Remember, this is a president who, when he first met the Israeli Prime Minister at the White House, said he didn't mind whether there's a one-state or two-state solution to the situation here. So real basics at an early stage of the administration not worked out. And I think for now it's an effort from Donald Trump to say, look, I'm personally invested in this. We'll have talks. We'll talk about all the different parameters of how we can move forward. But I don't think, even though Jared Kushner, as I say, is the man who is masterminding this, I don't think he comes in his briefcase with a new plan for the Middle East. I don't think there's going to be a new roadmap. Yes, there are areas like settlements. We've already heard Donald Trump saying that to Prime Minister Netanyahu, you need to go easy on settlements. And I'm sure there'll be, on the other side, other measures that he'll be pushing on the Palestinians. But I think in public, it will be about the ambition of this project. And again, the personal involvement of a president who says he is a master negotiator and he can achieve what has not been achieved here for so many decades.
Why did they decide to do it in this particular way, James? I mean, at some point, because these trips, you can't plan this in a week, you can't plan it in a month. Logistics, the security operation is absolutely huge. Why did they decide to make it Saudi Arabia, Israel, the Vatican, and then the G7? Why not do a state visit to one of the major European countries or one of the major NATO allies, for example?
Or what previous presidents have done going back many years, which is to visit one of the US's neighbours. I think in this case it would have had to have been Canada, because I'm not sure a visit to Mexico, given all the controversy of that wall, would have been a particularly good idea. No, they've tried to do something different and pretty ambitious. The White House will tell you that they're trying to connect with the world's faiths by going to Saudi Arabia, which has the two holiest places in Islam, coming now shortly from Tel Aviv, coming to Jerusalem, where I am now, beside the old city. Clearly that is a sacred city to three different religions, and going on to meet the Pope at the home of Catholicism in the Vatican. That is, we're told, the reason for this. Some of the trip was set in stone already, because a US president nearly always goes to a NATO summit and to a summit of the G7. That's something presidents attend. So the end of the trip was already there, but I think they've made a pretty ambitious and bold move to go for this trip that is quite so long and wide-ranging, a 9-day trip. And I think there are some worries in the White House, and have been for some time, about the length of this trip, with a president who in the next month is going to celebrate his 71st birthday. And just perhaps those worries are already being borne out. You heard the big speech to the Islamic world. Well, Donald Trump's tone sounded different, didn't it? It sounded like he was quieter, milder. Was that deliberate? Was he trying to give a more humble tone? I'm told by US officials, no. It's just that he was extraordinarily tired after the first couple of days of this trip, this grueling trip. I think it's likely you might see the beginnings and the ends of the day trimmed a bit going forward. We have a preliminary schedule but not a final schedule. I think they're quite worried that the president is going to be overtired by this, and what they don't want, of course, is any sort of gaffe, because yes, these are important matters they're discussing, but for the White House, one of the most important things is escaping controversies in Washington, and if there was some sort of gaffe here, then that would be a disaster, because they're really trying to turn the page while overseas.
Not wishing to connect in any way, shape or form, James, the idea that Mr. Trump could commit a gaffe on Twitter, but do you get the feeling that somebody's maybe, perhaps, could one suggest, taken his phone away from him, because you can't have him leaving Riyadh, leaving those conversations with the King of Saudi Arabia and talking about it on Twitter and finishing that tweet off with a 4 or 5 letter word in uppercase letters followed by an exclamation mark. I mean, there's custom and practice here that even this president has got to stand by.
Well, Donald Trump is not one who sticks to tradition. He's done everything differently. But you're right, it is so sensitive. There is diplomatic protocol. You are dealing with the Middle East, the most troubled and complicated area in the world. I am sure there are people trying to persuade him not to go on Twitter. So far, they seem to have succeeded. We've only had sort of pre-planned type official tweets, and not to speak off the cuff. And he's not done that. He's stuck pretty much to his script and to the autocue, and in fact not really many comments that he made when he's been meeting various leaders, chatting to them in front of the cameras, very brief comments. Now, I would again suggest